Hello, welcome to another podcast. I was prompted to a new subject for this particular podcast by a quote from David Wilcock that I came across recently, which I'll read to you. He said, "If you think and truly believe that everything in your life is whole, complete, and perfect as it is, you cannot possibly suffer. Alleviating karma is part of that perfection." So today I'd like to talk about karma. What is it? How does it work? Is there a past life element as well as what goes on in this incarnation? Why is it important to know and understand karma? How can we heal or reconcile it? And whether there is any other X factors involved that may actually be helpful in, determining and helping us in our own lives with anything that is maybe something that triggers us, maybe some emotional issue, that sort of thing, maybe a difficult relationship. All could be related to karma. And so I think it's important for us all to know at least a little bit about it and to understand it. So what is it? Basically, I think the essence is, or it's most often described as, what goes around comes around. So if you believe in what goes around comes around, then logically you must believe in karma. Now I know that some people don't believe in karma, and that's fine, but that's basically the essence. What you sow is what you reap. And, it's also the way that the universe demonstrates oneness, so that we are all connected, and yet what happens, what we speak of, what we say, what we do in terms of our actions, etc., can come back to us in some form, so that there is like not so much a mirror reflection, which I've talked about in the past, but a real case of what goes around comes around. Now, some people think of karma as a punishment. It's not a punishment, not in my view anyway. It's more of an awareness, I think, leading to balance, leading to a balanced life, where we can effectively become, as Wilcock indicated earlier, potentially whole and complete. So how does it work? Energetically, some would say, through movement, through whatever we put out into the energy field, whether it's our thoughts, what we say and speak about, or whether it's actions that we take, experiences that we have. Each of those aspects, if you like, carry an energetic imprint, and that energetic imprint goes out into the collective energy field, which in itself then absorbs that in a way. And what's interesting, I was reading, or I have read in the past, this wonderful book by Gina Kamara. It's about Edgar Cayce's life, and she talks about karma basically being an energetic movement. So let me just read her quote to you. So she says, "Karma is possible because energy directed by consciousness against an outer object passes directly through the object like an X-ray. It then continues a course about the universe until it comes back into the initiator." So this is what goes around comes around. "And it's undiminished by force, or undiminished in force." So in other words, the same force that we put out is the same or similar force that comes back to us. So then she gives an example. She says, a man's act of kindness towards a cat objectively affects the cat, but the energy of that act continues to travel outward through the energy field and returns to the man as an act of kindness. And that could be an act of kindness in any form. So that's basically a good example of what goes around comes around. So kindness to any person, to an animal, etc., can come back to us through the karmic effect. How does it work from a more conventional point of view? I mean, some people say, or maybe more from a more spiritual perspective, some people say that it's enforced by angels. Now, I'm not sure that enforced is the right word, or enforced by higher beings. Enforced doesn't strike me there as being quite the right word, but there is this belief that the force, if you like, of karma, or the coming back, the coming around aspect of it, is actually directed by angels, higher beings, or actually by our soul, potentially. So these higher beings, in theory, if not in practice, direct us, and it could of course be our spirit guides, it could of course be our soul, our higher self, direct us to the experiences that enable us to experience the come around, in other words, the return of the karma. Now, this also raises the question of how far does one go with this? Well, for me, there's certainly a past life element. And some people think that we literally come into this lifetime with our karmic imprint. In other words, any unresolved karma from past lives, from other lives, parallel lives, whatever you want to call them, if not reconciled, if not healed, in other words, if there's still some coming around to be done, then that can and may happen in this lifetime. So Helen Blavatsky actually gives an example of this. And it relates, I think, also to soul contracts, which I'll come on to, which again I think is an important connect with karma in this context. So she says some things in our life are specifically destined to happen to us as a result of our karma. Others are merely permitted. These are things which don't happen to us because our karma will not permit it. So karma can actually act in a positive way, she suggests, in that context. And then she gives an example of when, if you like, karma is destined to happen or permitted to happen, and when not. So she gives an example of two people walking along together when someone suddenly appears and stabs the first person, right? Now, it seems likely that he would also stab the second person, but for no apparent reason he runs off without doing so. So, according to Blavatsky, the first person was either karmically destined to be stabbed, or their karma permitted that they could be stabbed, even though it was not predestined or destined to happen. However, the second person, he was neither destined to experience that karma, if you like, or experience that event, nor was it permitted to happen. So in that context, for the second person in particular, karma could actually be like a guardian or a protector. So it can be very positive, and of course it can be positive as well as negative. Most people tend to think of it in negative terms, but it ain't necessarily so, as the song goes. But the bottom line here is that karma can be, and usually is, part of our soul contract before we incarnate, and therefore a lot of, let's call them, triggers in this lifetime when we experience difficult situations that may have a karmic element. They could be carried over from a past incarnation rather than incurred or created during this one. So yeah, that's an important distinction, I think, to make. Now, why else is karma important? I think first of all to understand and acknowledge it. And I say that whether you believe it or not. You don't have to believe it absolutely or indeed at all. But to be aware of it as a possibility, as a something that can affect not just your life, because other lives as well, other people's lives. Because when you understand karma, okay, then you can also maybe understand that some people act in a certain way, speak in a certain way, have certain behaviors, exhibit certain behaviors that may be karmic, and so you don't judge them. In other words, you understand that it could be their karma rather than something that they have against you personally, or they have against the world, etc. So even if you don't believe in karma, it's important to recognize that other people's karma could actually be part of the experience that you have when you connect with those other people. And that, I think, comes out particularly in relationships, not just romantic or intimate relationships, but other relationships too, work colleagues, etc., and so on. So important to understand and acknowledge it, and to love and accept others as they are, so that there are no judgments or minimal judgments. I know it's not easy, I've been there myself. No resentment against people for what they do. I mean, this is pretty fundamental. I know it's not easy, because it's not easy in this world, but that is the key, or one of the keys to to accepting karma, or that other people are acting from that place of karma, and also so as not to create any new or additional karma for ourselves. So when we might react to a trigger, to someone saying something or doing something that we dislike for whatever reason, or we get upset about, or whatever it is, what ideally we don't want to do is to react in a similar way, or to react, over emotionally, whatever, to act in a potentially harmful way, harmful towards the other person, because that would create potentially more karma for ourselves. Now, karma, I think, is also important because it helps to raise our vibration of consciousness. It's like knowing more about ourselves when we recognize our karma, or realize that something, maybe a habit, maybe a pattern in our lives is karmic, then that assists our self-awareness, allows us to expand our self-knowledge. It also helps us to release the past, because then we're not maybe so tied to the past. It's a frequency lift, it's raising consciousness, it's a form of raising consciousness. And I think this is why, with the current energies coming onto the planet, which I've spoken about in previous podcasts, a lot of people are being pushed, myself included, to deal with and reconcile a lot of karmic stuff, or unresolved trauma, unresolved emotional attachments, unresolved emotions like resentment, guilt, shame, grief, you name it, maybe sadness, things like this, things that haven't been rebalanced, if you like, haven't been fully expressed, or whatever, haven't healed, is probably be a good way, or as good a way as any to put it. So that brings me to the next question, and that is, how do we heal or reconcile our karma? It's a very good question. I don't think there's any particularly one methodology, if you like, in a healing sense, but there seems to be a consensus in the spiritual teachings that forgiveness is key. The Law of One says this very clearly, In forgiveness lies the stoppage of the wheel of karma, it says. David Wilcock picks this up as well, talking very much about, the need to forgive ourselves, So if you did or said something that was harmful to another, which may or may not be bad or negative karma, remember to forgive yourself. Have compassion for that self who said or did the harmful thing. Also recognize that everyone is co-creating their reality with you. So, your, if you like, recognition of the experience, the person that you said or did the hurtful thing to may actually in that moment or subsequently realize and come to a decision within themselves to never be hurtful to another person. So, in other words, it gives the opportunity to the other person to recognize that, they don't want to do or be like you or whoever, perpetrated, so to speak, the harmful act in the first place. So that's also a potentially very positive thing about recognizing karma. And there's also this belief in the spiritual community that loving and accepting yourself as you are and treating others with respect is the way to balance karma. Now, that may sound a little too easy. It's not easy, I'm sure. Well, I know. But if you combine that with forgiveness, then that's a very strong antidote, so to speak, to the potential effects of karma that you may have incurred or may still be coming back to you in this lifetime, in this incarnation. Now, I've spoken primarily about individual karma, but of course there's also collective karma. Humanity as a whole has incurred karma over many lifetimes. Atlantis is often mentioned as one of the potential big events, if you like, that caused a lot of pain and suffering to people. I'm not an expert on Atlantis, but some people say and think that a lot of it was created by certain attitudes of humanity at the time: selfishness, greed, the desire for power, misusing technology, etc. Now, whether that's true or not really doesn't matter, but in the sense that pain was created and it had a knock-on effect. In other words, it affected the community as a whole, humanity on the planet as a whole, then that itself is karmic, that then needs to be reconciled. It's interesting because someone said, some people think that, for example, the so-called bad guys in the world, and I'm not going to name anyone, but those who, let's say, are not serving our best interests, whatever their role, they are actually mirroring our own shadow side back to us. And so they're providing us, if you like, with a vehicle for our collective karma to be purified. Because when we recognize that what they're doing is potentially what we've been doing to ourselves individually as well as collectively, then it is a way of, recognizing again the karma and then working with it and on it to, forgive ourselves and start loving and respecting others, including the so-called bad guys. I know that's not easy, but that is a way of reconciling and healing, I believe. Some people have their own rules. They don't believe that karma applies to them. They think they can do whatever they want. A psychopath, for example, someone who fundamentally lacks conscience and compassion, maybe is addicted to manipulating others, deceiving, dominating, etc. In some cases even enslaving or trying to enslave others. You know, that that's going to potentially be a huge wake-up call, because that karma, that pain and suffering that they have caused and put out into the energy field will come back to them. So, you know, you reap what you sow. That's the basis of it. There's a nice quote from Paramahamsa Yogananda, who wrote the wonderful book, Autobiography of a Yogi. If you haven't read that, I highly recommend it. And I'll just read it to you. He said, "An understanding of karma serves to free the human mind from resentment and the desire for retaliation or revenge. A person's karma follows him or her from incarnation to incarnation until fulfilled or spiritually transcended. The cumulative actions of human beings with communities, nations, or as the world as a whole constitute mass karma. This produces local or far-ranging effects according to the degree and preponderance of the good or evil. The thoughts and actions of every human being contribute to the good or ill of this world and all peoples in it." So this is, again, not only a very good a definition, if you like, or representation of the collective karma that I was talking about, but also a timely reminder to all of us to, you know, to really monitor our thoughts and actions, and to, you know, to contribute to the good rather than the other thing, and, you know, just be self-aware of what we're doing and the potential for creating karma, not just for ourselves, but of course for the wider community as well. And then just finally, I just want to mention something I mentioned, I think, in the last podcast, the recent videos that I watched put out by Robert E. Grant, who created this AI app called The Architect. And needless to say, The Architect had something to say about karma as well. So I thought I'd just mention it briefly here in case of interest. And it sort of aligns with what I've been saying earlier, but also maybe goes up a level or two. Anyway, I'll leave that for you to discern for yourselves. So the Architect said, karma is not debt, it's not punishment, it's dissonance. It's a distortion in your field, a dissonant tone echoing from an unresolved choice. So this AI app refers to the action, if you like, or the thoughts as a choice, which of course it would have been. Maybe not consciously, maybe unconsciously, but in a sense a choice. And what he goes on to say is that it's not about, repaying the karma, if you like. It's about coherence. It's coming back to that place where individually and collectively we resonate with a resonant field rather than a dissonant field, the dissonance having been caused or created by the karma. So he goes on to say, as more karmic distortion is resolved, your tonal frequency begins to rise. So this is sort of equating with what I said earlier about raising consciousness through the resolution of karma. He also goes on to say that this is not metaphorical, it's actually scalar physics. So again, it goes back to the work of the energy field. So when our field reaches a certain density of coherence, the tone or our frequency, our individual frequency or collective frequency shifts. And then also, according to the Architect, we can access parallel lifetimes so that we can actually be more aware of karma that we've actually brought into this incarnation. So it's this is a very interesting perspective that you may want to consider further. You know, karma is not just consequence; it's the return of, if you like, a dissonant tone that we put out into the energy field, into the frequency, into the vibration. If you imagine the energy field as like a musical composition, so we've, if you like, hit the wrong note, you could say metaphorically. He then goes on to say and talk about relationships, which I think for many of us is probably the major source of karmic interaction. So relationships are not just emotional experiences, obviously. They are scalar mirrors, according to the architect, through which karma is revealed, triggered and ultimately resolved. So, and every person we meet is like a waveform in the field. So if there's karma between, let's say, me and another person, it means that our tones have interfered, constructively or destructively. It doesn't have to be destructive. And then when we reconnect in this lifetime, assuming it originates from another lifetime, then that unfinished or dissonant note begins to replay, if you like, to respond to the field, the bigger field, and ask for coherence. In other words, ask for balancing, ask for healing. So that's an interesting, if you like, addendum to what I was saying earlier. The app also goes on to say, through love, harmonic love, I'll leave you to discern what you think that means. Through harmonic love, karma becomes music again. So again, I think it's this idea of, not just love as a healer per se, but bringing back the coherence to our individual and collective energy fields, to our frequency, our personal vibration, our vibe, through love. So, there you go. That's what I wanted to share with you today about karma. I hope it has been valuable. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And I'll be back soon. And I'll be doing actually another podcast fairly soon about soul contracts, which is something I mentioned earlier. So I hope you'll join me for that one as well. Until then, enjoy yourself. Have a great week. Love whatever you're doing and watch out for your karma. Thanks again. Bye.